out free meals to any kid who needs it, who needs one during COVID, because public schools were closed. It's a noble act to rally as a community and take care of our future. But what actually happened, it makes me sick. Uh, it was a sinister scheme in Minnesota is where this happened, to defraud the American taxpayer hundreds of millions of dollars that never went to feeding kids. And it's like, what is going on? So welcome back to the show. I'm going to get into it with this story. It is a big one, and it's been a few years of development with this story. From what I could find, learning about it just recently, seeing how much work has been put into this. But it is the Feeding Our Future story. You might have heard about it. That's coming from Minnesota. Let me get the chat up here. You can tell me if you know about this story, if you've been hearing about it. I've been seeing it on other podcasts, or listening to it on other podcasts, and then seeing it on other shows. And it got me, got me to dive deep into figuring out what's going on. If this could be potentially more than one show talking about how this relates to the bigger picture. But the Feeding Our Future, it's a just so you know, it's a nonprofit organization. And what comes up for questions to ask ourselves is like, what is right and wrong? Because this story right here shows just what's so wrong about what is going on in our country. And the reason why it does make me sick, and it's so shocking, is because it's involving our future. Think about that, of taking care of our future, and to do something so wrong. It's sickening to think about this. So we gotta make sure we continue to have this conversation of what is right and wrong, and understand that this is wrong as I get into this, and making sure that we focus on the hard work of creating change, meaningful, real change in how we move forward as a society and in our communities across the U.S. The other conversation that comes up with for question is big organizations and how little accountability there is for these big organizations. Understanding where does it not make sense. I go back to America's future as a small business renaissance, and it's made possible by free market capitalism. And so how can we continue to move in that direction of one, supporting small businesses where we can, and then minimizing, I think, localizing when it comes to government involvement, localizing on the supply chain. I've talked about that before, getting rid of unnecessary regulations where it doesn't make any sense. And then where can there be accountability as well? That's another one. And the other question is, do you care about the future of this country? Or are you just focused on yourself, this self-centeredness? And I get how the environment can feed into this self-centeredness and the terrible situation that we are in this country. And so again, I say we got a lot of work to do. I think of the national debt being over $38 trillion in this country, how Gen Z is the most in-debt generation for their age in history here in the US. Like, there's a lot of things that can make you really mad. And we gotta hold the line of connecting, making sure that we're connecting back to focusing on what is right and doing what is right, especially when it's really hard, and focusing on our moral values of honesty being one of them, and accountability, another one, and not taking advantage. I think about that, not taking advantage of our future. And then the other one is, the other question that comes up is taxes. Where is it just unnecessary for taxes? Where can that be? I mean, if you were to ever take the time to look at the tax code and just how complicated it is and overwhelming it is, where can we simplify that? And some of the stories I want to get into is first Feeding Our Future, this story that's happening, it's still ongoing in Minnesota. I want to share with you the history of it that I could find. And then if you have been in this, if you've been going or researching more about the story, let me know where I'm off here. And then I want to get into some side quests that came up from this. And then talk about a statement that President Trump said last week relating to income tax. I want to talk about that. So let me first, again, set the stage here, lead off with where this all began. So in Minnesota, where the first, what happened for the investigation timeline. So you have that. So January of 2022 is when the FBI raids Feeding Our Future offices and other sites. Then what happens is September of that year, that is when you have the first major federal indictments that happen. Yeah, let me make sure I have that right. Yeah, indictment. Yeah, so September. So what has now happened up to last time I checked, and the number continues to grow, but there are 38 people charged, and a lot of them are Somali. There, if you don't know about this in Minnesota, there's a big population, a Somali population in Minnesota, and New York Times, New York Times article. Let me read you this headline to share with you what's going on here. So this came out recently, and the headline goes, "How Fraud Swamped Minnesota's Social Services System on Tim Walz's Watch." So Tim Walz, he's a governor, and this happened when this happened for the scheme. Again, hundreds of millions of dollars. This happened during COVID, and what it's part of something even bigger that's going on in Minnesota when it comes to the fraud scheme. There's just like one part of a bigger what's becoming a developing continuously a story that's developing, but it's a part of something even bigger. And within this, so for the 78 people that are charged, there are 7 that are convicted, and then over 50 have pled guilty. Okay, so this isn't like this is something you can look up as well to back it up, but there's already been convictions. There's over 50 have pled guilty. And when we get into this, again, it's shocking. Like I think about who is involved here. You have nonprofit organizations. You got you don't have no when it comes to accountability on this from state to federal government. There's so many mistakes that come up. Then you look at small businesses and their involvement. And this is something where I want to hold accountability to small businesses, and goes back to, we got to hold the accountability to each other of, are we supporting our communities? Do we care about the future of our country, and making sure that we're not taking advantage of people in such a sinister way. So for the percentage, to give you an idea, they're getting nearly, it was for the number, it's nearly $250 million. And of that amount, 3% went to feeding kids, and the rest for personal gain, like buying cars, real estate, going on honeymoons. And so for that 3%, that's like, which is still a lot of money, a little over 7 million out of nearly $250 million that went to feeding kids. I mean, that pisses me off. I don't know about you. And that is something where I mean, I go back to this movement. It's a determined movement, but we got a lot of work ahead of us. We cannot let this kind of stuff happen. And especially having small businesses be involved in this. Like, that is not all around. This is not okay. And it's wrong. But when I saw that for how this was being done, it made me really angry. So to give you an idea, break it down for how this money flowed. So it was started with USDA, and so the Department of Agriculture. There's a program within that then connected to the Minnesota Department of Education, because again, this is relating back to, because of public schools closing down during COVID, there was the need to support feeding kids. And I mean, that's for a whole nother separate conversation of like how that system works with public schools and lunch programs, and that's a whole other side quest. We're gonna hold off on that one, but it went from the Department of Education, Minnesota Department of Education, to then Feeding Our Future. And how Feeding Our Future was paid was through meal counts. And a lot of these meal counts were just like made up. Um, and the meal counts it was from the Feeding Our Future sponsored sites. And what these sites are, these meal sites, they were mostly small businesses. And so small businesses that would include things like grocery stores, delis, restaurants, food supplies, suppliers and vendors, food markets, cafes, kitchens. But the thing was, and this is like, you think about this stuff. You can think about this in like movies, and then when you hear about it in reality, and you have to face these evil forces and the evilness that is out there, it can be shocking. And I said that before with the truth. It can be overwhelming at times. It can even be shocking, but it can give you peace of understanding what is going on. Again, being able to answer what is going on, and then focus on how to make meaningful change here and move forward. So, uh, what happened is a lot of these small businesses were shell companies, just faked the operations. Like they existed in paper, and that was it. Is how you can think about it. And they would then fake these meal counts, send up, and Feeding Our Future was in on this for the organization. You send it up to Feeding Our Future, that then take your taxpayer dollars. Again, these hundreds of millions of dollars, it's taxpayer money that then is being used for personal gain. Yeah. Yeah, I'm just gonna let that sit. Let that sit. So when I come back to, um, yeah, I'm gonna get to the side quest here, but again, it comes back to what is right and wrong. I mean, this is wrong, and it goes back to the other question of big organizations, accountability, and that doesn't. It's. I think about it. If a small business were to, um, let's say you had a cafe, and then you got people to pay for their meals, but then you never brought out any food, people would know right away. Like there would be uproar. They would be like, this is ridiculous. We are not coming back to this restaurant. We're going to let everyone know to not come back to this restaurant. And then the restaurant most likely would close. Okay. So that is a benefit when it comes to small businesses of transparency, of accountability, of like you're gonna notice. Like I think back to it's gonna have a major impact in that kind of situation very fast. And so the incentive then is to make sure that the food comes out, make sure what the customer is asking for happens. But in this situation where us as citizens have a hard time being able to hold accountability to these government organizations to know what is actually going on. There's not a lot of transparency that comes up. That then that's where the question comes up of where can we localize government involvement? Where can we minimize government involvement across these industries, across of services? And where can we rely more back on private citizens to do the right thing and step up? Because the bigger the organization, the harder it is for the accountability, easier for mistakes to be ignored, or you don't even realize that they're happening. And that's something we got to continue to talk about and voice. And that's where, again, I say with America's Future, it's a small business renaissance. It really is. Uh, Change is coming. I think about, change is coming. Change is inevitable. And we've got to channel this into America's Future of being able to understand that this is wrong. And when it comes to stepping up, especially when it's really hard, stepping up and doing what's right. So yeah, that's really important. So going off of these side quests, I realize that this is bigger than just feeding our future. There's a bigger scheme here. The biggest estimate that I saw, again, these are estimates, or this is an estimate, but it's like over $1 billion in this fraud scheme that's happening in Minnesota. And so it relates back to Medicaid is one area, Medicaid fraud. Another one is housing too, and a SNAP. So SNAP program. So those are where I feel like there's going to be more. Or the feeling is that there's going to be more than one show that I do on this, because it seems like it's a much bigger scheme that has been happening, and this feeding our future that I'm getting into today is just one part of that. But when I was getting into more information, what came up for side quests here was what happened back in June of 2025, June of this year. So on June 9th, there was a vote, Minnesota, in the House, Senate. There's a vote on not providing medical care to illegals in Minnesota as part of a bigger bills. Is my understanding. It was part of a bigger one, but the only Democrat in the House that voted for this was Melissa. Let me make sure I have her name right. Melissa Hartman. And what happened on June 14th, less than a week later, is she and her husband are murdered in their house. And as I was getting into understanding more about this is where it just gets weird. And if you have any information that you found when it comes to this situation, please share that in the comments, because it gets into things that you think about in the movies. Gets back to these like you start to realize things don't make sense. You start to, as I've said before, lean into be curious and ask questions. But the more I got into learning about the shooter, or currently the alleged shooter, let me put it that way, alleged shooter that has been charged, but is pleading not guilty. His note and what's in his note, it gets me to ask more questions, and to ask myself, is there a connection here to the bigger fraud scheme that's going on in Minnesota? And you start to get the wool out of your eyes of realizing, how does this all work? How does because when you filter the worldview of power and the rest of us, you ask yourself, how is this all working at different levels in our country, in our society? What's going on here? And that was something that came up for me. And I'm gonna take some more time. That's why I said I feel like there's gonna be more than one show to explore that. But I'm trying to find the ways to make sure it ties back to you, small business owner. But it always comes back to, for me, where there can be unnecessary government involvement, let's focus on making that happen in our industries and go back more towards free market capitalism. That's what comes up with that. So the other, so from that, I'm going to take. I do want to know if you have any information about this story, feeding our future, the bigger fraud scheme that's happening, and how you feel about this, hearing this as a small business owner or supporter of a small business. What comes up for you? I want to know, because I think people could be quick to go to like, oh, well, we need more control on small businesses. Like, there's no way they could get away with this. But you gotta recognize this was through our taxpayer dollars, and through us as taxpayers, our money through the government funding this. So how does more control make sense? That doesn't make sense to me, because what you're then doing is putting more power in organizations within or departments within the government on a federal level that actually facilitated this, made this possible, because it was taxpayer money for the hundreds of millions of dollars. So that whole narrative, like we need other people to come in and control. No, we've got to take accountability for ourselves, take responsibility, and call out when something is wrong, to actually voice that and step up and communicate that. And especially in our small business owner community, I think about that. It's really important. We gotta hold each other accountable. And I've said it before, on this show, I'm seeking out the truth, and where I make mistakes, I'm going to make them and admit them to you. And we've got to be able to to work together and unite relating to this. Like, again, none of us are perfect, but we can know what is right and wrong, and you can feel that in your gut. And it's having making sure you connect, you step into courage, and you do what is right even when it's really, really difficult. And I've shared that with you before, of how when I was creating my first in-person event or conference, the big one, how I lied leading up to that event happening. And just, I knew that in my gut. I knew it was wrong. I made a mistake, and I had to change my ways after the event, and share that, share what had actually happened. And so we've got to hold ourselves accountable. We really do. And a lot of changes need to be made here. And we've got to work with elected officials that truly care about the American people, that care about the future of this country. And I've said it before, relating to the to if it's a fraud, this fraud scheme. I've talked about it before with the amount of illegals in this country, mass migration that has happened, and how I do support mass deportations. And then understanding what is going on with our housing crisis, and when it comes to how we've built ourselves on a debt society, more and more connections are happening. And I want to get better at clearly communicating what those connections are with you. And so, as the fire hose of information is coming my way, I'm going to be continuing to do the best I can to continue to improve how I communicate this to you, and get it across of like I'm feeling in my gut that these are all connected in some way. And it comes back to America's future. And as I'm going to keep saying it. I'm going to say it one more time. America's future is a small business renaissance. So what I learned last week, this is relating to income tax, that I want to share with you. And I'm going to, I'll see if something comes out of this, right? Like, President Trump President Trump said it. I don't know how he's going to make it happen. If this is the case, he's relating it to tariffs. But President Trump last week talked about the potential of, in the future, of no federal income tax. And this goes back to, that'd be incredible. Like, that would just be so amazing if that actually happens for small businesses. I think about what that could potentially do, how it relates to this scheme that happened. And you can go down the path of this hopeless feeling when things aren't changing. And you kind of might, you get into that feeling of like, whoa, what the hell what are we doing here? Like, what's going on here? And get really, really angry. But hearing that, I was just like, oh man, that would be amazing. I don't know how it's going to work out, how to make that possible. But we could take the time to ask that question and how to make it work, and figure out potential solutions moving forward to make it happen. But that will be interesting to see what unfolds for that. But I appreciate your support with this movement. You continue to fuel me to share, seek out the truth, to share that with you, to move forward with courage. You continue to fuel me in that way. It can be really difficult to hear the truth, to see the truth, communicate that truth. And so I'm really grateful for your support. And yeah, I'll see you tomorrow.